Today, we are discussing how to protect children. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, dedicated to raising awareness and preventing child abuse and neglect in Bermuda. I'm Sherrie Simmons, and I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel as we discuss this very important topic. Let's start with you, Debi Ray Rivers. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
You are with SCARS. Tell me how that charity started.
Yeah, so in 2004, I discovered that both of my little girls were sexually molested by a 78-year-old trusted family member. And they were 9 and 10 at the time. And it was just the most difficult time for our family, for them. And as I went through the journey of dealing with this, I realized there was a lot of work that we needed to do when it comes to protecting children. There was a lot of, I would say, denial, minimization. And I just don't think we really understood the long-term effects of child sexual abuse and the damage that can be caused by a child when they're abused. And people just weren't reacting responsibly. And I'm not saying that to judge, Sherrie. I'm saying that because we didn't have education around it. We didn't understand this issue. And so took me a few years to heal. And then I decided that I needed to, because, I wanted to know as a mom, how did I miss this? How did I not know one of my daughters was abused for 4 years at this man's hands? Why didn't I pick up on the signs? And so I wanted to be educated, and if there was something I could have done to prevent this. And so I found this educational tool called Stewards of Children. It was a program developed by an organization in the United States called Darkness to Light, and they teach adults how to recognize, prevent, and react responsibly to the issue of child sexual abuse. So I came back to Bermuda, started a nonprofit, wrote a business plan, and then John Brunson, a childhood friend, a past chairman of SCARS, he heard I was starting, and off we went. We started educating our community in May 2012, and we've educated almost 24% of the adult population in prevention. So our mission is to reduce the risk of child sexual abuse and to be an advocate and a voice for children who've been sexually molested, as well as their affected family, and we do that by educating our community.
Yes. And this is what this panel, this discussion is about today. 11 years on, when we talk about educating people about what it looks like, let's get down to how do you recognize these signs? And is this part of what we're going to be discussing today, part of your educational outreach, so adults and people who have healthy relationships with children, who love their children, understand what the signs look like?
Yeah, well, that's what we teach in our 3-hour educational curriculum. We teach adults how to recognize signs, how to react responsibly to this. First, we teach them what sexual abuse is, which doesn't only mean penetration. It can be inappropriate viewing of a child's naked body parts. It could be touching. It could be asking a child to inappropriately view or touch the adult's body, but it's all harmful to children. So we teach them what the facts are first. And then we let them know that it is preventable. There are things that we can do to prevent children from being abused. And we talk about that. How can we do that? And then we talk about it. That's one of the steps, talking to our children about body safety, giving them the tools when they're not with us to protect themselves. And then we also talk about recognizing signs, as you said. What are some signs that might indicate a child's been abused? I mean, not every sign means sexual abuse, but signs say it's time to start paying attention, start asking some open-ended questions when we see a child withdraw or depressed or doesn't want to suddenly go home with somebody, or anger, a change of behavior. That's a huge sign. So we teach adults how to recognize some of those signs, and when they recognize those signs, how to start asking some open-ended questions to find out what's going on in that little child's life. And this campaign was born basically out of we have to do all these things simply because they are a child, and they are depending on us as adults to recognize signs.
Let's turn now to Dr. De Silva. Thank you for joining us. How do you have those types of conversations? Oftentimes adults themselves aren't comfortable with questions and talking about intimacy, sexuality, proper touching versus improper touching. Help us to understand how we broach those conversations with our children.
Sure. Thank you for having Family Center on the panel here today. As we've worked on this special campaign with SCARS, and in particular, what we specialize in Family Center is on helping parents, helping adults to have the tools to be able to have those conversations. And really, it is in alignment with what SCARS teaches in their trainings as well. And so starting the conversation begins with developing one's own awareness. And I think that's why SCARS is so important in terms of what they do from a prevention standpoint, because I think just actually hearing the information yourself and absorbing it in so that it's no longer taboo or scary, or if you feel like you talk about it aloud, that maybe if something wasn't happening, it will happen now. We conjure up all sorts of internal messages in our own heads about, as parents, we'll say, you know, if we talk to our children about the topic of sex, then maybe they're going to start doing it now. Or if we talk about this, if we ask them that if something bad is happening, maybe that bad thing is going to start. And that is not the case. Instead, it's the opposite. We empower ourselves first with awareness, the language that we need, and then we help to share that with our young people as well. And different ages require different types of conversations as well. And that's again why Family Center is there to support the work that SCARS is doing, because every developmental stage that a child is in, you can have a slightly different conversation. But children of all ages really need to have this conversation, or parents need to have this conversation, and adults with children of all ages.
What about a scenario where oftentimes when someone is convicted of sexually abusing a child, you will hear people say, well, I always suspected that that person was up to something, or something wasn't quite right about, but I didn't want to accuse the individual because that's a very serious accusation. And if it turns out not to be true, this is an open-ended question for any member of the panel. What do adults who suspect that there may be some abuse going on, how do you handle that? You don't want to falsely accuse someone.
Well, I
if
can
that
answer
is the
that.
concern.
I'd like to answer that. When you make a report about a suspicion, you're not making an accusation. You're asking for a service to be provided. You're asking for an investigation to take place. That's what you're doing, but you have to do it because it's not up to us as adults to determine whether something happened. It's up to us to give that to the professionals like Child and Family Services and let them determine whether a crime has occurred. So is it easy? It absolutely is not. But guess what? That child is depending on that adult to do that.
Can we touch on what happens if a child goes to a trusted adult and says, Grandpa's doing something, Mommy has touched me inappropriately, something, and they're not believed? Can we talk about some of the ramifications of that?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. Many times a child does not usually come to an adult without a warranted reason. And many times if a child is not believed, that has reasons to do with the adult and their own discomfort in hearing the information. So, you know, it's very important for adults to hear what the child has to say. And it's anytime you hear a child report anything happening to them, it's your duty as any adult to report it, regardless of who you are.
Let's delve a little bit more into the responsibility, because it sounds like what we as adults, the responsibility that we have in terms of protecting children. Mm-hmm. Let's delve a little deeper in that. What is the responsibility that adults who are in contact with children, who have children in their family, neighborhood, et cetera, what are our key responsibilities as part of this awareness campaign and what we can do in terms of protecting children?
You know, Sherrie, one of the things that comes to mind is so important for us to, when the child actually comes to us, to acknowledge the fact that we believe them. Mm-hmm. That's a really important framework for the child to actually know before we even move to anything else, because it's important that they also experience our safety and our belief that we can be there for them. I think the other part has to do with which you know has already been highlighted, which is the fact that once they know that we believe them, then they know that it's important for us to then move into a response of letting them know that we are going to now, do what we can to keep them safe, and that we're going to reach out and get help for them. And these are important steps for a child to know as we are engaging them.
What are some of the signs that parents and adults who are responsible for children can look out for that indicate there might be something going on, that there may be some abuse taking place?
Well, if you know the child, you'll know and you'll see a marked difference and change in their behavior, whether it's at school or at home. Some kids will internalize and become more isolating. Um, they may engage in less interest in different activities that they used to do, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have kids that might externalize. So they may be more promiscuous. They may act out more. But all in all, kids will change, their behaviors change for a reason. And they're asking somebody to pay attention. And that's why we have to address it when that does, if we do see any changes.
Yes. So are these changes that you talk about, oftentimes people might say, oh, well, if a child is 11 years old, for example, and there are certain changes that children go through during that preteen, or if they're just chalking it up to that, is there a way to know the difference between what are just the general changes that all children go through developmentally, or if there's something else going on?
I think one of the things that we could consider as significant shifts is things also, in addition to what's brought up, is their sleeping pattern changing, their eating habits. As we talk about the shifts in behavior, we're referring to a marked difference in mood and withdrawing behavior, and no longer sort of interested in the things that they used to be, which, when you combine them together, you're seeing something that marks a higher level of distress. Because there are times that we could look at certain behaviors like some adolescence adjustment and changes that may appear to be, but when you look at in terms of your child, which was brought up also, when you know your child, you could see that there's something markedly different, and you get to explore with them in terms of what's happening.
Yeah.
And if
Go ahead.
I was going to just add, I think that, it's such a great question, because as parents and as adults, we can, put things down to, oh, it's just they're changing, in terms of adolescence, they're a preteen, et cetera. And so I think that the most harm that we could do is to just not have a conversation with them about it as well. So in addition to noticing all of these things, is to sit down and actually chat with them, or if it's on the car ride somewhere, or if it's to go and pick up their favorite food or something like that. So pick a time and place where you know that it can feel more relaxed and it's not pressure at the dinner table in front of everybody, where you can say, hey, I've noticed these changes, just want to check in with you. What may be what's going on, what's happening in the background, as opposed to you have now become, or you are more angry, and it can sound very accusatory. So that is so much more harmful than pausing to ask some really good questions, and then they can feel validated, seen, and heard, because our job is to love them unconditionally, simply because they are children, which is the theme of this campaign.
And thank you so much for helping us with the language to use when we're talking with our young people, because it is indeed a difficult conversation. Now, what happens if, in having that conversation, the child then reveals that, yes, something has happened, they have been abused? Help us, what do parents and guardians do from that moment?
So it's asking gentle questions next, in terms of, well, tell me more about that. Well, what do you feel comfortable sharing, so that they can actually feel safe and they can feel empowered to be able to hold the conversation in a controlled manner. Whenever a person has been abused, their power has been taken from them. And so we don't want to contribute to that feeling of powerlessness, or that I'm just here for adults to do what they want with me. But instead to really give them a sense of control over how they're going to respond and how the conversation is going to continue. But we also need to let them know that we need to tell people about this who can investigate what's gone on, so that we can ensure that they can continue to be safe, and that whoever did this to them does not continue to do this to them or anybody else.
I think you want to make sure that you validate their feelings. You validate what they've told you first, so that they realize that what they've done is brave, and otherwise, they just need to know that what they've said is valid, and that their feelings are going to be protected.
Because a lot of times perpetrators will tell them no one will believe you, or you're always bad, so they're going to think this isn't true, and they're threatened, and so they're afraid right from the onset because they have been silenced when it comes to sexual harm.
And that it's not their fault. Nothing that they said, did, or didn't say or didn't do made this their fault.
And we'd like to thank you for joining us today on this very important discussion on how to protect children here in Bermuda from sexual abuse, any type of child abuse, actually, but we're concentrating right now particularly on sexual abuse and neglect here in Bermuda. So we want you to stay tuned. There's more information, valuable